You have gold. You have everything. If you have gold, you have everything. You can say anything you want. You can do anything you want. If you have gold, you have everything.
Welcome back to Innocent Souls in the Hands of the Yellow King, True Detective Tribute Podcast. This is episode 2, Broken Windows of the Bayou. We'll discuss the cinematography, more symbolism, more social disorganization, criminology, really how we profile these serial killers. We go from the burnt down church to the dead cats. As mentioned last week, there will be spoilers involved in the show, so we recommend doing the rewatch with us or starting this podcast after you've fully completed season 1 of the best television show there is. Throw us a follow, drop us a comment, and enjoy.
Today we're looking at the architecture of the nightmare, or dissecting Seeing Things, the episode that proved True Detective wasn't just a cop show, but a piece of high art Southern Noir.
Yep, good to be back for episode 2 here. Thank you everyone for following along and being here with us. So, in this episode, the broken windows, they're not just literal. They're the shuttered schools and the empty pews. When the state and the church, represented here by that classic Tuttle family and their, let's call it perverted influence, failed to provide a safety net, the social fabric just doesn't fray. It dissolves. This vacuum here is where the Yellow King builds its throne. He isn't an intruder. He is a local byproduct of a system that failed the innocent that it is supposed to protect.
Kind of strange. Like you might be dangerous.
Well, of course I'm dangerous. I'm police. I can do terrible things to people.
So, we've been talking a lot about the, quote, broken windows of the Bayou, right? When we think of the location. But I got to ask. So we both seen this season. I've lost track of count, but let's say a dozen times. This rewatch, was it any different for you? I mean, you just closed the book on 25 years working in the field. How does True Detective land now that you're looking at it from the other side of that career?
It's colder, but with a purpose, Floyd. That's the best way I can put it. There's a quote from Marty in an episode later on the show where he says, "A man's game charges a man's price." And, watching it 12 years later after it premiered, that hits differently. So personally, yes, it's a perspective where I'm looking less at the procedural part of it and more the price that was paid to get their man. Back then, looking at Russ Cole, was he being deep? Obviously. But now I realize he's just a man who's seen so much data, he's actually becoming the data. And as my door closes, the opportunity for us, mainly connected through being fans and doing this podcast each week, opens up. Over the last year, I really leaned into the True Detective subreddit as a positive outlet. And I think today there's over 62,000 followers. And I just started writing posts about my personal and professional experiences in the fields. And they was kind of started to become popular, and it became an outlet that organically grew into this podcast. So there's freedom to create and apply my craft to the show I love, and to create content that pays tribute, but is also positive, inspiring. And doing that reminds me that the light is still winning. And Floyd, how's it been for you during this rewatch? Having a background in psychology, physically being at some of these locations and launching this podcast, how is it different for you?
Yeah, it's sometimes I'm like, do I want to rewatch it? And the answer always ends up being yes. And there's always something new that sticks out, or I always become hyper focused on a certain character. Like obviously we have our Rust, we have our Marty, but then it's like those other characters that we really started to lean into. So for this rewatch, I was really, from a psych perspective, I always kind of overlooked like those visuals that Cole has, because when I first saw it, it was before I was studying psychology, and I was like, oh, that kind of feels like a weird mythical, like this is fake. Like when he sees those visions, the spirals in the sky, or like, when Marty's driving him and he gets a little dizzy. But then from a psych perspective, I'm like, oh no, that's all part of his psyche, part of his own mental illnesses, part of his own battles. And
Right.
we'll get into that a little more later. But yeah, it's just crazy. You mentioned the subreddit. And I remember being big on that subreddit when the show was live, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, like what is the Yellow King? It's got to be Ledoux. It's got to be yada yada. Maybe it's Russ. No one knows." And it was just so. It was like when Breaking Bad. The subreddits were just going off, and it was like a peak moment for Reddit in terms of message boards. But it's so interesting, like you said, how even today, looking back on the 12-year anniversary of the pilot of True Detective, people are still hooked. People are still curious. People are still dissecting it. And we welcome all those folks to, listen to this podcast, and let's learn something together. So on that note, I know you just had a post, always getting those upvotes, man. You got like over 200 upvotes, and it was strictly about the cinematography. So Adam Arkapaw, he's the he did all the cinematography in this first season of True Detective, and yeah, what made you want to be like, let's focus on the cinematography for this one?
I mean, for the most part, I think this is the episode where it really stands out. Arkapaw won an Emmy for this season, particularly Who Goes There, which we'll discuss in a future episode. During the rewatch, this episode, seeing things is where the visual language really locks in. I think we start to see this transition from the grit, the crime scene, to the broken windows of the community in the Bayou.
So we get into the psych profile. We talk about the visuals. Episode 2, it's where Pizzolatto and Arkapaw, they really lean into that Michael Mann influence. We got the wide, lonely shots of the industrial plants. It feels like Heat or Miami Vice, but now we're relocated to the swamp. So Arkapaw uses those wide lenses. You see the vast, decaying landscape. And when I was driving through these areas, I got to drive through Norco, which is that just industrial area where there's a lot of, tales and even factual evidence of people getting cancer from living so close to those plantations. And it just has this total feel of desolation and just sadness to it. And it's kind of like how Mann uses the LA skyline in Heat. The environment, it's not just a background, it's a character as well. And here we see in Louisiana where it's really closing in on Cole and Hart. So with Miami Vice, and then the vibe compared with the industrial areas of Louisiana, it's that contrast of harsh artificial light against a natural rotting world. It's vintage Michael Mann. And Pizzolatto, he explicitly called the back half of the season a Michael Mann tribute album, which I thought was really interesting. The seeds are sown right there for us in the Bayou. So I want to ask you, I know you're a huge fan of Mann. Did you notice the tributes in your first watch, or is that something you picked up, later on in rewatches?
It's intentional. It creates that sense of isolation. In criminology, we call it the geography of crime. When the landscape looks that indifferent, it's easier to go unnoticed. It's the visual representation of institutional neglect. Arkapaw uses these wide lenses to show this vast, decaying landscape, just like Michael Mann uses the LA skyline in Heat. And, during your rewatch, you start to realize that the environment isn't just a background, but it's a character that's closing in on Cole and Hart. There's 2 scenes during the rewatch in episode 2 that look like they were cut from a Michael Mann movie and kind of dropped in here. There's one scene where Rust is driving on the interstate and starts to have hallucinations from his synesthesia. And there's another scene where he's buying Quaaludes from one of the working girl prostitutes. And for the most part, he's standing in the neon glow of this like truck stop motel. And it looks like straight out of Miami Vice or like straight out of the movie Heat. And I was like, there's the influence right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when he's on his mission to buy Quaaludes, he doesn't want uppers. He wants the downers there. So how did Michael Mann and his work in Miami Vice, Heat, inevitably True Detective influence you personally within, your personal and professional life?
I mean, looking back, I mean, the way I was organized and effective, my craft, it didn't start in a textbook. It started with Michael Mann. And growing up here and down in having roots in South Florida, you start to see the way he painted Miami, and it changed the way I saw the world.
I mean, people always talk neon, cars, the women, the drugs. Speaking like Miami and just that, that Miami Vice, right? The Vices. They made a whole Grand Theft Auto series out of it for the video game heads out there. But it's much deeper than the aesthetic, isn't it? For you, at least.
No, definitely. And I think throughout the South in general, there's like these areas where you're in like two different centuries at once. It's like the reality of this geographic schizophrenia, if that makes sense.
How do you mean? Like it looks like progress on the highway, or?
I mean, that's the trap. On one end, you've got the urban courthouses, the glass, the steel, the Italian marble. It's glamorous. I mean, you walk those halls in a sharp suit and you feel like you're in the center of a civilized world. And that's where the high stakes games are played and where the money talks in a whisper.
The glamorous side of things, huh?
Exactly. But you drive 45 minutes inland past the suburban strip mall and the world just breaks. Suddenly the glass towers are gone. And you're staring at the cane fields. It's the manufacturing side or the dirty side, if you want to call it that. And there's this like heavy machinery in the backgrounds. There's black soot from the prescribed burns of the cane fields. I mean, the humidity, you can cut it with a knife, and it feels for the most part like it's trying to almost like take the asphalt out of the streets. So, I mean, it's almost like a different world entirely.
Yeah, a different world entirely, but it's also like a different law entirely.
Definitely. I think in the courthouse, everything is clinical, but out in those fields and cane fields, life is raw. It's the dirt and the diesel. I mean, you start to realize that all that glamour in the urban core is built right on top of that grit and dirt. And for myself and my roots in South Florida, I think a lot of the way it influenced me in my professional life was it was always about the move. It's the professional look, the approach. When you look at Mann's work and the character development of Sonny Crockett of Miami Vice or Vincent Hanna and Heat, those were two characters that had a huge influence on me personally and professionally. And, both of them are masters of their craft, but they're also haunted by it. I spent 25 years in criminology, and I walked those courtroom halls in the suits, and I stood in the soot of the cane fields. I led the duality that Mann was obsessed with, the high gloss professional life versus the internal vacuum.
And do you see that same DNA like in Rust Cohle?
Absolutely. Rust is the evolution of the Mann protagonist. He's Neil Macaulay if he had a badge and a ledger. He has that same discipline, that willingness to walk away from anything in 30 seconds flat if he feels the heat around the corner. When I look at my career, I see those same archetypes. I mean, you do the job, you master the data, but it's what you do, it's not who you are.
Guy told me one time, don't let yourself get attached to anything you are not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat around the corner.
And then, so now we have this podcast. Is this you like looking back at this ghost, looking back at who you are now versus what you were then or what you've become? Tell me about that.
It's me documenting the architecture of the ghosts. I mean, from the streets of Miami to the lock room and the bayous that we see in True Detective, the professional remains the same and the data stays cold. And that's why I tell the listeners, keep your eye on the data, because characters like Hannah, Crockett, and Rust Cohle, they didn't blink, and neither does the truth.
That's pretty vacant.
Yeah, it is what it is. It's that or we both better go do something else, pal.
I don't know how to do anything else.
Neither do I.
I don't much want to either.
Neither do I.
You know, I have this recurring dream. I'm sitting at this big banquet table, and all the victims of all the murders I ever worked are sitting at this table, and they're staring at me with these black eyeballs, because they got 8-ball hemorrhages from the head wounds. And there they are, these big balloon people, because I found them 2 weeks after they'd been under the bed. The neighbors reported the smell. And there they are, all of them just sitting there.
What do they say?
Nothing.
No talk?
Just, they don't have anything to say. See, we just look at each other. They look at me. And that's it. That's the dream.
So let's pivot here to episode 2, specifically the symbolism. You know, the trinity of symbolism. So during the second episode rewatch, again, maybe my 12th time, 20th, I'm not sure. But I noticed there's like a rhythm to it, isn't there? Like it's not just chaos, but what are you seeing in the whole geometry of this nightmare?
It is a trinity. The threefold path that's being laid out for us, or us being forced to walk. If you look closely, every piece of evidence and every shadow chase falls into these 3 buckets. There's the devil's net, that it really represents the chase. There's the spiral, which represents the descent. And then the crucifix, which represents the spiritual journey. And I think looking at the devil's net that we see at the end of episode 1, and then we kind of see it as this calling card that the Yellow King uses. It's the first layer is the physical and psychological trap. And these bird traps we keep finding aren't just folk art. They represent the devil's net. It's the immediate chase towards the Yellow King. It's this feeling of being tangled in this web where everything feels like a thread designed to pull us deeper into the woods rather than out of them. And I think this is shown throughout the episode through Rust and Marty's chase and the pursuit. And again, time being a factor, especially how it's represented in 1995. And then throughout this episode, there's the spiral. And this is a mark we see on the victims, and it's the patterns and the migrations of the birds that we see Rust have a synesthesia hallucination, watching birds turn into a spiral. And it's the breakdown of linear time. This is what eventually leads us, and Marty, into the heart of Carcosa. It's a warning that the deeper we go, the more the world twists until we can't tell the beginning from the end. And then finally, there's this crucifix or cross that during the rewatch, I noticed throughout it, whether it was Rust waking up in his sparse apartment, or it was Rust, in the church with the crucifix in the background. And, whether Rust realizes it or not, he's on this spiritual journey throughout the series. And the symbolism, for the most part, the devil's net you see throughout 95 representing the chase. And then you start to see the spiral representing this universe or Carcosa that Rust and Marty eventually have to go into to solve their case. But at the end, and we'll talk more about it, there's this spiritual redemption and awakening that Rust has. And we start to see this throughout the second episode, and just the symbolism of the cross and the crucifix. And he's walking this path of martyrism, carrying the weight of these innocent souls, while trying to find some sort of personal redemption in a place that feels godless.
You starred in True Detective, which I think explores some darker aspects of human nature. What did you take from that role, from that experience, philosophically, psychologically?
The freedom of being on an island. He was such a singular character and of a singular mind. And as you know, it wasn't a dance party up there in his mind. It was some heavy stuff. But also existentially for him, always death would be a deliverance for him. It'd also be a cop-out in a way. It'd also be, he was not a man who was going to give himself amnesty and didn't allow it from the rest of the world. Wouldn't give himself an out. And while living in his head and heart and spirit was more of a hell than arguably dying.
You know, all that you said there, the symbolism, you know, we have religion, we have good versus evil, but then evil involved with religion. And a lot of it that stood out to me, kind of from like a fan perspective, and just, you know, I consider myself an artsy type, right? And then when we get to like the tattoos and analyzing specifically Reggie Ledoux's tattoos, that's something I look forward to in a future episode, because I'm the type of person who will like freeze the frame and I want
Right.
to see every little detail, whether it's tattoos or the clothes they're wearing, or like when they kind of show paperwork, I want to know what's written on that paperwork. You know, like little notes like that. And we'll talk later about, you know, the visit to Dora Lang's mother's house. You know, the symbolism and everything we see in there.
And I think the tattoo analysis of Reggie Ledoux, I get that question a lot from just people talking the show that realize I was in the field or what, you know, are in the field. I think during the rewatch of The Secret Fate of All Life and that Reggie Ledoux scene, I'll be able to break down what those tattoos mean, because they tell a story about Ledoux's criminal affiliations and his beliefs into the occult. So I think in a future episode, we'll be able to do that.
Sweet. And then another hot topic is, I mean, it comes up on my feed every now and then. We see it on the subreddit, we see it on social media, but a True Detective reunion. And I'm not talking, you know, like a season 5, The Night, True Detective, whatever it was called. See how unmemorable it was. I forget what the latest season was. But a True Detective reunion in terms of our, you know, dynamic duo, Marty and Rust, getting together with Nick. Like, is that a good idea? Or is that kind of like they did it so well the first time? Do we need them to possibly tarnish what we already love and hold? What do you think?
I think season 1 is magic and perfection that is not going to be able to be duplicated. And I think anything that they try to do will tarnish that legacy. I understand the temptation. I understand the money. I understand that Netflix now owns HBO, and there's the arena. And there's the audience and the hunger for it, I'm sure. It'd be very hard to see Russ Cole in the world of AI, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But that's just my personal perspective.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's like, you know, does the Rolling Stones, do they need to make new music? No, they don't.
Right.
You know,
Just
like,
play the hits. Play the hits. Yeah.
We have our classic show, and then season 2. Again, I like season 2. We're not even going to get into that. It went a different way. Like season 1, True Detective. Whenever I talk about my favorite shows, I can't really say True Detective, but I say season 1, True Detective. And I think I'm satisfied with it. I don't think I need more. I think if they did a podcast together or, you know, something to analyze, but like they've done that before. And so I don't think they need to get in the studio together to recreate anything. Could they do a totally different story of something else? Sure. But I think where we left off with Rust and Marty, and then how other True Detectives kind of like slowly have little nods to them. I remember season 3, they pull up like a past case, you know, in Louisiana of missing children, and you see Rust and Marty. I think that's like a nice nod to them. It's like an in memoriam, you know, of what we remember. But I think we're all satisfied. You know, it's, again, if we're saying it's the best television series ever, let's leave it at that, right?
Absolutely.
It was a gigantic undertaking, definitely the biggest, just in terms of scope, the biggest project I've been involved with.
As a production, it was a long shoot. The 15, 16, 17-hour nights were adding up. So there were enough, you're with somebody 6 months, there's enough time for people to blow fuses, there's enough time to get frustrated and have to back off. So the fatigue set in.
You know what it's like being your partner? Huh? Fuck you.
No, buddy, without me, there is no you.
And it was a great experience because I felt like we were doing something that had integrity and depth and passion. And it has to do with the case, of course, but it has to do with the relationship between these two complicated men.
You know the real difference between you and me?
Denial.
The difference is You are incapable of admitting doubt. Now that sounds like denial to me.
I doubt that.
So I want to bring it back to something we mentioned in our pilot episode of our podcast, and that's back to the social disorganization theory. So more of a deep dive that we see in episode 2 here is Cole and Hart, they're driving past those burnt out churches, like the vacant, abandoned ghost towns that are basically left to rot after the hurricanes. And when you spent 2.5 decades in criminology, I feel like you realize those aren't just spooky locations, right? Like these are system failures. So when I'm rewatching episode 2, we see the broken windows everywhere, right? Like that type of phenomenon. It's the way the local cops, they shrug off the missing girls, with oftentimes like in the show, they'll drive past a sign of like, who killed me? And it's for a missing woman. And just the landscape itself, it feels like it's just being swallowed by the swamp. And a takeaway here, from my rewatch and just, overall what I think of the show and the Yellow King specifically, the motive, it just doesn't feel like murder. It's almost like myth making, right? He's filling this void, left by the social disorganization with just terrifying new religion, I guess you can call it. He's just this monster hiding in plain sight. He makes cameos in the show because the people whose job it was to fix these windows, they decided to simply look the other way.
I think during my rewatch, it definitely reminds me of a mentor in the field that I always would tell me, don't bring checkers to a chess match.
I like that. And like you talk about this decay like it's a living thing, but most of the guys we work with, they just see a crime, a suspect, in a cage. Why do you see a chess match where they see kind of a street fight?
I think throughout this season, you start to see local law enforcement and they're playing checkers. They're looking for the next jump, the quick capture, the easy case to close. They want a simple win on a flat board. But I think with Rust, he understood the landscape. He knew the board isn't flat. It's this archetype of trauma and institutional neglect that he just wasn't looking for the quote unquote killer, but he's reading the movements of an adversary that has been setting the pieces for decades. I think when you start to break down social disorganization, you realize the game isn't just about who pulled the trigger, but it's about how the environment that was manipulated to ensure that trigger was eventually pulled.
And the people living in it, the ones in the trailer parks and the bleached out coastal towns.
I think that's the tragedy of it. They're the innocent souls that don't even realize that they're on the board. They think that they're just living their lives, trying to get by, but they're actually pawns in a game they never knew they signed up for. They're the collateral of the spiral. While the checker players are looking for the motive, the chess players like Russ is looking at the structural weaknesses that made the crime inevitable. By the time the innocent realize that the game's being played, they're already being pawns to the Yellow King.
Now look at these coastal towns, right? It's not just in the floorboards, it's in the people. So tell me something. From where you're sitting, is this social disorganization a byproduct of the criminal elements we're chasing, or is it the result of, let's say, massive institutional failure?
Both. I think it's a feedback loop. I mean, you're kind of asking if the fever causes the infection or if the infection causes the fever. I think the institutional failure is in the soil. When the schools, the churches, and local government pull back, or worse, it creates a vacuum. And the vacuum isn't just empty space, it's an invitation. And the criminal elements, the Yellow Kings and the cults of the world, they don't create the decay. They just harvest in it. They thrive in the social disorganization because the institutions failed to provide a map or a safety net for these innocent souls. And by the time we show up with a badge and a notebook, we're just cataloging a collapse that started 30 years ago.
Well said. And I kind of mentioned earlier and this was a scene in particular which I appreciated after, a handful of rewatches. And that's kind of the analysis of the Dora Lang home. Let's call it the anatomy of a mantle. And it's the scene where they notify Dora Lang's mother, and I can't remember what else she was in, but her face is like, it's like that motherly older figure where it's like she seems sweet, but also there's some darkness she's likely hiding, whether it's trauma or just some type of dementia-induced mind thing going on there. And we have Marty trying to be, the big man, the comfort, but he's a little out of his depth. But meanwhile, I really pay attention to Rust, when he's in the room and, they're speaking with Dora Lang's mother and they're in the home and he's just kind of like vibrating, like he's dissecting the house and then the camera is kind of following everything he's looking at before we even hear from the mother. What is he actually seeing there from his perspective of, is he doing some type of specific like criminology approach here?
I think he's seeing the architecture of a collapse. I think while Marty's looking for a way to say, I'm sorry, we see Russ, for the most part, reading the walls. He's able to clock, for lack of a better term, the empty prescription bottles. That plays back to the social disorganization. Then we see these religious statues throughout the home. That's almost like a spiritual place or a map that feels abandoned. But the kicker that I saw in the rewatch is right on the mantle, there's a photograph of Dora Lang as a child surrounded by men in masks. And it's this coup de grace, like Santeria type of vibe for the most part. That's right there on the mantle. And to any regular cop, it's just going to be this weird old photo. But I think to Russ, it's this confession. And he sees that the devil's net isn't just in the woods, but it's woven into the family history. He realizes the game isn't just starting, it's being played on this mantle for a generation.
And the mother, like she doesn't even seem to see the horror in the photo. It's put on display as if it's like a children's, yearbook photo or something. Like what's going on there?
I think that's the innocence that we talked about. She's so deep in disorganization that the ritual looks like tradition. She doesn't realize her daughter was a pawn on a board that was being set before she was even born. Russ sees the Trinity right there, the pills, the statues, and the photo of the spiral leading back to Carcosa.
So bringing it back to, we mentioned seeing the creepy photo at the Lang house, but then there's other real life creepy stuff we either see or hear about, from the burnt churches to the pastor saying about, vandalism of the dead cats getting thrown around. What can you add to that? What is this?
My brain here starts checking boxes in a very specific checklist that we call the McDonald triad. And you got to keep your eyes on the data here because the data doesn't blink. What you're seeing isn't a creepy atmosphere. It's a forensic roadmap of the budding sociopaths. And you have to put your head in Cole's head in 95. Back then, the FBI behavioral science student was the gospel, and the McDonald triad was the holy trinity of profiling. And Cole just wasn't looking at a body of Dora Lang, but looking for the three pillars of a sociopath's childhood.
The triad. So I've heard the name, but how does Russ tie that into a cult leader like our infamous Yellow King?
It's about the evolution of control. First, you have animal cruelty. Cole sees these mutilated livestock and the ritualistic use of antlers, and he knows he's not dealing with a beginner. This is someone who graduated from killing cats in the woods to staging human nightmares.
And for the second element?
Fire setting, arson. Think about that burnout church ruins we saw. To a profiler in 95, arson isn't about destruction. It's about a predator asserting control over an environment that once made them feel small. It's a signature of rage that needs a physical outlet.
Gotcha. Okay. And then the third, the one people usually skip over, the bedwetting.
Sounds clinical, maybe even minor, but for us, it's a key to the psyche. It represents a childhood of total powerlessness and chronic anxiety. The Yellow King overcompensates for that early lack of control by building Carcosa, a world breeds the absolute authority. Russ sees the triad and realizes this killer didn't disappear out of thin air. He's been evolving his violence for decades.
I can see the rise of the sun. The devil's still on the run. All the pretty things burn out.
If you were drowning, I'd throw you a fucking barbell. Why would I ever help you?
So I feel like we mention a lot of Rust Cole in this podcast and just in general, right? But I kind of want to highlight Woody Harrelson's performance, especially in episode 2, Seeing Things. It's like the definitive showcase for this volcanic, multi-layered talent of Woody Harrelson. And, as mentioned, Russ Cole, he occupies that whole the philosophical foreground, the nihilistic monologues, right? The time is a flat circle quotes, all the quote, weird shit or odd shit that Marty tells him. But Harrelson, he delivers this masterclass of like the mask of normalcy, right? And I feel like episode 1, when he says, what, normal ass dude, big ass dick.
Yeah.
We see him, he navigates the friction between his competing identities. Steady, authoritative detective, jovial family man. He was an athlete, loves to talk sports, loves to drink beer. Then we see this desperate, very insecure man seeking refuge in the arms of a mistress that he thinks he has control over, while also a wife that he really thinks he has control over and can get away with anything. It's just this performance of like profound contradictions, which I found really interesting. And Harrelson portrays Marty, not as like a simple hypocrite, but as a man who genuinely believes in the traditional structures he is actively dismantling with his own hands. And as the episode progresses, Harrelson, he allows the cracks in Marty's, quote, big man type of persona to really widen. And you can see the physical toll of this spiral just starting to manifest. The way he grips a glass, the tightening of his jaw, that domestic silence of his own home becomes much louder than even the crime scenes. We see him at work and then we see him at home. He's a man trying to play this game of like moral checkers, as we mentioned, the whole chess and checkers thing, while the world around him is just shifted into a grand, dark chess match that he's not prepared for. And by the time the episode reaches its peak, Harrelson has mapped out the tragic geography of a man losing his grip on the very things he claims to protect. Standout performance in my mind because it really makes Marty's failures feel human and inevitable, setting the stage for the spiritual and familial collapse that really looms over the rest of the season.
Your mom's still alive?
Maybe. And we learn a lot about Marty's other life.
When he's forced to be the family man, I think he's internally suffering.
I come home to one place where there's supposed to be peace and calm, and you throw this shit.
Who told you that? It's not always that way. It's not supposed to be.
It's supposed to be what I want.
You get a sense of what he thinks a family is supposed to serve and the sense it's supposed to serve him.
Hart has an environment which provides him boundaries and rules.
Well, I think when we talk about the profession, the field, or, the game, so to speak, let's talk about the entry fee. And I think, people look at Rust and Marty and they see heroes, or maybe they see burnouts. What I recognize from 25 years in the trenches, it's duct tape.
The duct tape.
Look at their lives. Marty's got the house, he's got the kids, he's got the normal setup, but it's peeling at the edges. It's held together by lies and whiskey. And Rust is this raw nerve in a cheap suit. Their personal lives are literally like duct taped together just to keep the engine running long enough to close the next file. In this business, you don't balance the life, you manage to collapse.
I was married, Marty, for 3 years. We had a baby girl. She died. Car accident. She was 2 years old. Marriage couldn't handle it.
Your kid died? Oh, I'm sorry, man. I'm so sorry. I didn't...
No, man, it wasn't you guys. It was just me. I was worried. Being around that kind of thing.
Now, is it the job that breaks them, or were they already kind of broken like that?
That's the secret. I think these jobs, the high stakes, the high risk deep dives into the dark, they don't just happen to people. They attract a specific breed. High risk jobs attract high risk people. And you have to have a certain amount of broken in you to want to stare at the Yellow King all day. You have to be that kind of person who's comfortable in the wreckage.
Yeah, you just think of where Russ lives, the pictures, his pretty sad apartment is just his job. And the job, it's like a magnet.
Exactly. You think you're hunting the monster, but you're just looking for a place of your own chaos to make sense. The price is steep. Eventually, the duct tape loses its stick. The facade, the glamorous courthouse, and the stable family man falls away. And all you're left with is the data and the dirt. Like I always tell you, the data is the only thing that we get left with in the end. It doesn't blink. And it doesn't lie about the price you paid.
Yeah, I think the job does that to a lot of guys. Changes you. Some guys just notice, that's all.
Well, I can't say the job made me this way. More like me being this way made me right for the job. And I used to think about it more, but you reach a certain age, you know who you are. Now I live in a little room out in the country behind a bar. Work 4 nights a week. In between, I drink. And there ain't nobody there to stop me. I know who I am. And after all these years, there's a victory in that.
Yeah, man. Looking at the triad, the broken windows, all the symbolism we discussed, it's like we're looking at that map of a ghost. Monster built by a landscape that just simply stopped caring. So we peel back the first layer of the rot, right? We've seen how the MacDonald triad, it builds the monster and those broken windows of the bayou to give him a place to hide. But the science only takes us so far. To find the Yellow King, you have to understand what he believes.
That's right. Next time we'll be stepping into the locked room. We're moving from the dirt of the fields to the fervor of the tent revivals. We're going to dissect religion, spirituality, and the dangerous philosophy that Rust and Marty are walking into.
So looking forward to next week, our 3rd episode. We once again have a very fun homework assignment for you guys. Let's keep the rewatch going. Let's rewatch episode 3. Watch the sermon, look at the icons, and ask yourself, is the locked room a place of protection, or is it a trap? We'll be waiting for you there. M.R. Floyd, signing off.
And as for the rest of you, whether you walk in the marble halls of the courthouse or the soot of the cane fields, don't let the glamour blind you. Stay focused, stay cynical, and keep your eyes on the data because the data doesn't blink.